I know where there's some, right here in the hall, clerk.
No, Molly, not in there. I have
Okay, the case has been cleaned up quite a bit. Managed to get most of that black stuff. Recall there was a rectangle or a square of black something, magic marker or something, all over the bottom. Got that off. Cleaned up as best I can. This case has seen damage through the dye or whatever it is down to the finish. That glue stain, I think it was glue, is better, not perfect, but better. There was paint on one end of the other of this right here, I guess. Those are cleaned up. So overall, it's looking pretty good. The front panel's been off. Replaced the grill cloth that's behind it. Cleaned up the two buttons that came with it, on-off volume and the vernier tuning, which leaves this one, the nav and normal button, and the broadcast and long wave button. As you'll recall, this thing was in there, and as it turned out, it was glued in, and there was a piece. What they did was they put a piece of hacksaw blade in the notch right here in this knob, and then slid this over it all with a gob of glue in there. And unfortunately, they picked a knob that you can't even hold. Once it's on there, you can't even, there's nothing to grab. So I found a source of the apparently the original knob. It's because these are on-off switches in essence. That's all you need. The color isn't quite the same. That's close, but it's not an ideal match to these. So I'm not sure this is even original, but it's a heck of a lot more useful and original than this brown thing. So it's just a friction fit, slides over the knurled end of the split shaft, has kind of pointers at both ends. It's very thin plastic right here. In fact, the first thing I did with it is I slid it a little ways on here just to make sure it fit, and then just reached under there with my finger to pry it up and broke this side. Broke this thin piece of plastic away. So I glued that back on. But now what I'm going to do is cast this and make some copies for myself. I'll make 2 or 3 or 4, and if somebody that gets in touch needs one, I'll have 1 or 2 on hand that I can pass on, and a mold to make more if I want to. So I presume this button is the same for both sides. There's no reason for it not to be. So let's make some of these. All right. What we want to do is make a mold of this, and to do that we build a box using these 4 things, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. And then we use a product like this, which is a good mold making product. This is Mold Max 60 silicon rubber compound. This stuff is in this big tub. It looks like, I don't know, paint, thick paint, and it's mixed with a curing agent, which comes in this little blue bottle, and it's a bit of this to a drop of this. So that's how you make the mold in the first place. Then once you have the mold set up, you need some casting epoxy. And casting epoxy really isn't much different than plain epoxy. I don't think. It's a little bit easier to pour. This is Easy Cast. It's available from Michael's, from all kinds of places. And it's a two-part epoxy, part A, part B, equal measures. That will make the hard part. So you create a mold of this part, and it has to be a two-part mold so you can mold the inside as well. And then you spray mold release all over it, and pour in the epoxy, mixed epoxy. In this case, I want it to be black, so I've got some black epoxy dye here, which I'll stir in a bit once I've got that mixed up. And by the way, there are hundreds, if not, well, tens, if not hundreds of videos, much better videos than I'm about to do, on how to make, cast and make plastic parts. But I'm going to do one here, and I'll show you how I do it. Oh, the one other thing that you do need is a hot glue gun. And there's my ancient old one. So I'll step through. To start with, you need to make a box to hold the item that you're going to cast or make a mold of. And the easiest way that I found is to buy some artboard, and all that is styrofoam sandwiched between two pieces of paper. And you can get this virtually anywhere. If you have a local art supply store, they have some. I've cut some out. What I've got here is a 2 square inch piece of artboard. I'm going to hot glue these 4 pieces, which are 1.5 inches, I think, to create a 4-sided cube right on top of this piece of artboard. And I'll do it using hot glue.
When I feel like that, Johnny, it's done.
Okay, here's our box. As you can see, the switch fits in there fairly comfortably, or the knob rather. And let's talk about what's next. I want to make a 2-part mold. Here's a 2-part mold I made for a radio knob. The actual knob itself was a curved arc. I don't think I have one around here, but that's the one part of it. The other part is the base, where you create this shape and then push this down on there to evacuate the epoxy where you have the hollow middle. For example, I want to create this shape. This is the outside of the knob, but I also want it to have a shaft. Sorry, again. For example, I want to create this shape on the one part of the mold, and then the other part of the mold I want to have the bottom including that hole right there. And that hole is very important because that's what fits down over the shaft. So what you do is you make a mold for the top part, Then you make the mirror mold for the bottom part, and they fit together like this. This is the top part, this is the bottom part, and they are keyed together so that they fit precisely. So when it comes time to make the button, pour the epoxy in here, you push this down on top, you squeeze out excess epoxy on both sides, and that leaves you with a properly shaped mold. So in order to do that, we have to be able to take a mold, make a mold of the this half first. And the easiest way to do that, and it'll look a little strange, but is to take some of this modeling clay. And it really doesn't matter what kind of clay it is. You take some of this modeling clay, and what I'm going to do is cut out roughly that shape out of this. Then the top of this button will go down into the clay like that, and then the whole thing will go down into that box. And then we'll pour the other half, the silicon. I decided to use this tap silicon platinum. Don't have much left. Okay. I'll use that because it's this stuff. It's very very detailed. You can get a lot of very fine detail with this silicon, and I want a lot of detail. So that goes down in there. You then mix your silicon and fill this, or not fill it, but fill it above there. And if you're really cautious, you'll put this whole thing in a vacuum chamber and suck the air out of it. I'm not that cautious, so I won't do that. But I'll step through this and show you what I do. Okay, it's considerably flatter down in there. So now I'll push my knob in again so that it just is even with the very top of that layer of clay. Just about like that. Okay. I don't know if you can see that down in there. See if this autofocus is it working. Yeah, so it's just even, and the top side is down. So the next thing I do will be kind of, what I have here are a couple of cap nuts. They're nuts but with a domed top. And I don't have two of the same size, as you can tell, but it doesn't matter for our purposes. What happens with these is they turn into registration keys, so you don't get the top and the bottom. When you make this two-part mold, you don't get the top and the bottom swapped. So what I'll do is put one of these in that corner right there, and I'll put the other one in this corner right here. Oops. And that's all it takes. They just need to be mildly anchored in the clay. So what you need generally is a container to hold the silicon, and then since it's 50/50 by volume, I'm going to do it by weight. So I'm just using a kitchen scale here. And I'll set it, once it wakes up, I'll set it to grams. And we'll do so many grams of part A and the same number of grams of part B into the cup, and stir carefully, and we'll be done. And I'm ready to pour. So in this case, it's going to be, if I can get that to set to 0, about 15 grams, I think, of part B. That'll leave me actually enough from these two containers to do the other half too. So up to 30 of part A. 31. Big deal. And then stir, but stir very gently. Stirring induces bubbles. It introduces a lot of bubbles into the silicon, and you don't want to whip it into a froth. So you want to stir very slowly, consistently, making sure you get it all. You have about a 15-minute working time, so it's not a rush on this stuff, but just swirl it or stir it very gently, and once you've got it stirred up, you can begin to pour. When you pour it into the very corner of the mold or the box, and as slowly as you can stand it. That reduces the number of bubbles that you'll introduce during pouring. So here we're trying to just fill the box ever so slowly up past our cap nuts, up past the top of the shaft, and covering the top of the shaft with a fair amount of silicon. You don't need to go all the way to the top of the box. You can if you want, but you don't need to. But you do need to cover your part sufficiently. In this case, I'm leaving about maybe as much as a half an inch, so that the end of the shaft is about under a half an inch of silicon. And that's kind of it. Pour slowly. Get a straight pen ready, because there will be bubbles showing up. So you'll have a pen ready, pen, P-I-N, not P-E-N, P-I-N, to prick the bubbles as they come to the top. And in this particular case, because I need the silicon to go all the way down in that hole in the shaft, I stuck the pen down in there and stirred it around to induce bubbles to come up out of there, so there wouldn't be any voids in the bottom. So you stir it around in there, and pretty soon you'll see a big bubble of air come up out of there, and of course you pop that. And once that's all done, you set it aside for a couple of hours. In this case it'll be overnight, because I have stopped for the day, and I'll pick this up tomorrow. So we'll see how it looks in the morning. See you later. Take care and stay healthy.